Welcome to the Co-Movement Gym podcast. This is just a little podcast that we at Co-Movement Gym do for our community members. Try to keep you guys up to date on some interesting and hopefully useful health and fitness related topics. So today, I think I have a good one. This is something I've been wanting to talk about for a while. Just hopefully something that's going to be interesting and useful for a lot of our members. It's going to be the difference between training for two different goals. So the difference between training for hypertrophy or versus strength.
The Co-Movement Gym podcast is supported by Native Path Supplements and Lombardi Chiropractic. Mention this podcast or click on the links in the episode description for a nice discount on us.
So right off the bat, let's just define those two things. Hypertrophy might be a word that some people haven't heard before, but that just means making your muscles bigger. Hypertrophy means growth. So it's just the growth of new muscle tissue. And then strength is strength. That's kind of a more obvious one. This is about movement. So one big difference right off the bat that I want to point out before we get into this is hypertrophy training. And when we're talking about hypertrophy, we're talking about muscle. And when we're talking about strength, we're talking about movement. And that's a distinction that I think a lot of people don't really think about or haven't thought about, but it's really important to understand. Hypertrophy is about muscle and strength is about movement, meaning you can't make a muscle stronger. That's something that a lot of people say. They say that they have weak biceps or strong biceps or whatever. Muscle is just muscle. It contracts when you tell it to contract. There's no such thing really as a strong or weak muscle. Muscles can get bigger, they can get smaller, and they do what we tell them to do. What you can make stronger, when we talk about strength, we're talking about movement, like I said. So when it comes to strength, you're talking about how strong is your squat? How strong is your deadlift? How strong are you at pull-ups? Something like that. But those are movements: squatting, deadlifting, push-ups, pull-ups, bicep curl. When we're talking about hypertrophy, we're talking about a muscle. So how big or small is your pectoralis muscle, your quadricep, your deltoid, and so on. Okay. So in today's episode, we're going to talk about how to train in the gym for those two goals, depending on which goal you have, either hypertrophy or strength, or maybe both. A lot of people want a combination of the two things. Right off the bat, let's just talk about the benefits, though, why you might want to train for either or both of these two things. So we'll start with hypertrophy. Why would you want to do hypertrophy training? In other words, why would you want to try to make your muscles grow? The first, probably most common benefit that a lot of people choose to do hypertrophy training for is aesthetics. We all want to look a certain way, whatever that way is to you. Some people want to have a lot of muscle. Some people just want to have a little bit of muscle. Some people want to have muscle in certain areas of their body. They might think that their legs are big, but their arms are small, so they'd like to make their arms bigger, or the other way around. Something like that. This is totally a matter of preference. There's no right or wrong answer to how much muscle growth you do or don't want. It's just, it's like anything else, just like a haircut or what clothes you decide to wear. We all have a body type and shape that we kind of aspire to have, and an ideal shape that we'd like to have to our bodies. And hypertrophy training is how we can target and develop certain muscles of the body to give them the shape that we want. And that's actually, aesthetics is it gets kind of a bad rap. It seems like it's a vanity thing. It seems like a vain goal, to try to make yourself look better. But like I said, that's just natural. We all dress a certain way, and I don't know, want to have a tan in the summer, want a certain haircut. So there's nothing wrong with trying to make your body look the way that you'd like it to look. So that's one good reason to train for hypertrophy. But on top of that, there are a lot of health and fitness or health related benefits to hypertrophy training, to having muscle. And I'm glad this is being talked about more in recent years. Muscle is extremely important for your overall health and longevity. Not just having adequate amounts of muscle, but having healthy muscle tissue that functions properly. Muscle is the largest organ in your body. And we all know how important our organs are: our heart, our kidneys, our lungs, our brain, all that kind of stuff. Muscle is an organ also. And this is something that, 20 years ago, if you took, when I took college courses in biology, physiology, that kind of stuff, if they asked you what the largest organ in the body was, the correct answer would have been the skin, the integument. And in a lot of textbooks, it'll still say that the skin is the largest organ in the body. Muscle wasn't really thought of as an organ until pretty recently. It was just thought of as, the stuff we have on our body that we need to move, but it wasn't really thought of as an organ. And now in the last couple decades, a lot more exercise physiologists and doctors and professionals in health are starting to realize that muscle actually is an organ. That's basically because muscle is talking to the rest of your body, and that's what an organ does. It's measuring things in your body. It's paying attention to your pH and blood pressure and things like that, and paying attention to what other organs are doing, and it's constantly talking back and forth with these other organs and it's reacting to the rest of your physiology, to your, like I said, your blood pressure, your blood pH, your blood sugar levels of other macronutrients, and so on, and helps control a lot of these things. And that's basically the definition of an organ. So you really want that stuff. If you want your body to function properly and to have good overall health, you want your organs to be healthy and to work properly, and to be well developed. And muscle, like I said, is the largest organ in the body. Other health benefits, though, of muscle: glucose disposal. Muscle is where everyone's worried about blood sugar levels, right? That's something you get checked when you go to the doctor. And they'll make sure that your fasting blood glucose is in a proper range. They'll check your HbA1c to try to see if you're on the road to prediabetes or have metabolic concerns, things like that. Muscle is where we safely store blood sugar. We all eat sugar, we all eat carbohydrates. It's part of almost everyone's diet, and we don't want that sugar going into places in the body where it shouldn't be, because it'll cause a lot of damage in your arteries, in your brain, in other tissues. Muscle is the place on our body where we can safely store that sugar in the form of glycogen to be used later for energy. And the more muscle that you have, that means you have a larger storage capacity for sugar, which is a good thing, because when we run out of storage, then sugar ends up going places we don't want it. So by developing more muscle, we have better blood glucose control and better prevention of those metabolic issues like diabetes and things like that, and better weight control also, because if we can store the sugar in muscle, it's not going to get stored as fat elsewhere on our body. Muscle also regulates the immune system. Muscle is the main reservoir of amino acids in our body, and those amino acids are used to create new immune system components and things like that. So healthy, well-developed musculature helps you have a healthy immune system. Muscle boosts our metabolism. It's a very metabolically active tissue. So if you'd like to have a higher metabolism, having more muscle on your body will have you burning more calories all day long, something everyone really likes. Injury prevention. Muscle surrounds and protects all of our joints. If you want your joints to be kind of fortified against, acute injuries, when you fall and things like that, muscle tissue helps to reinforce those joints and protect them when they get banged up, which happens to all of us in life. And of course, muscle is required to move. So we all want to move well. You're going to need an adequate amount of muscle tissue on your body to do that. Let's see. I've got a lot of notes to go through here, so I'm going to be checking my notes occasionally to make sure I'm staying on track. I want to make sure that I present this in a way that is logical and moves well for all you guys. Let's see. So, yeah, I just wanted to also mention that aside from the health benefits of the actual muscle tissue itself, training for hypertrophy, the actual resistance training that you do, has plenty of health benefits on its own. Like improved lifting weights and doing resistance training always helps to improve bone mineral density, because you're putting stress on your skeleton as you're doing the exercises. Burns calories, obviously. It has numerous cardiovascular benefits. Anyone who's lifted weights heavy and done heavy resistance training knows it gets your heart rate up and all that kind of stuff. Better blood flow, and even psychological benefits. There's improved blood flow to the brain. A lot of people feel a lot better when they're on a regular exercise program, boost their mood and all that kind of stuff. So that's just additional benefits of doing any resistance training, including hypertrophy training. Now, one of the reasons why I really want to talk about hypertrophy training is, aside from all these benefits of muscle, I think it's really important now that we've covered those benefits to understand that we lose muscle as we age. And this is something that's also being talked about more recently. Dr. Peter Attia on his podcast, he talks about this all the time, how he wants to have good amounts of muscle when he's young because he knows he's going to lose it with every passing decade of life as he gets older. And we all know how important muscle is for our health. So the more that you can retain as you get into your later years, the better. So yeah, we lose muscle as we age, which means that we lose those health benefits of muscle as we age, unless we do hypertrophy training to help maintain the muscle we have or even get a little bit more. So I want to talk quick about how fast we lose muscle as we age. I think it's a really important thing for people to know. You lose about 1%, 1% of muscle size per year after the age of 40. Okay? Now, 1% doesn't sound like a lot, but that's per year. By the age of 45, that means we've lost 5% of the muscle that we had on our body when we were 40 years old. And 5% is a pretty decent amount. By the age of 50, we've lost 10%. By 65, we've lost 25%. That's now at this point, 65 years old is still young, especially these days. We all want to be active and healthy when we're in our mid 60s. But at this rate of muscle loss, most people will have lost a quarter of the muscle that they had at 40 by the time they're 65. And then just think about even later years, by the age of 80, we've lost 40% of the muscle we had at 40. And I think we all expect to live into our 80s and hopefully beyond. And we'd like to have good quality of life in those years. So how do you think a 40% loss of muscle is going to affect your quality of life when you're 80 years old? Is it any wonder that people in this age bracket are so prone to, breaking their hip if they fall or something like that, and have other health issues popping up all the time? So this age-related muscle loss, the point is it's extremely preventable with hypertrophy training. Will you manage to keep all of your muscle? No, probably not. But if you do hypertrophy training regularly and consistently through the years, you can actually hold on to pretty close to all the muscle that you had at the age of 40 with each passing decade. You'll lose a little bit here and there. It's going to happen naturally, but we can hold on to a significant amount of it and have much better health in our later years. So, okay. Bottom line there, everyone should train for at least some hypertrophy. Again, hypertrophy means muscle growth. If not for aesthetic purposes, at least for the health benefits and to prevent muscle loss as we get older. And one more important point that I wanted to bring up is everything that I've just said applies to both men and women. This is important because what we see in personal training is that a lot of women neglect hypertrophy training, or at least they kind of undervalue it. There's a really old myth that still persists to this day that if women do hypertrophy training, then they'll get big and bulky. And a lot of women don't want to be bulky. They worry about having too big of muscles. This is absolutely not the case. It's very difficult for women to add muscle to their body. It's actually really difficult for men to do it too. Hypertrophy training is really hard. There's a lot of guys I know who do hypertrophy training year round and complain that they barely see, results, or they've only added like a little bit and they hope to have added more. And men have 10 times the level of testosterone and, anabolic hormones as compared to women. So you can only imagine how hard it is for women to add significant amounts of muscle to their body to the point where they're going to actually look bulky. What actually happens when women do hypertrophy training typically is that their muscles just get a better shape. They'll have a slightly more, let's say, athletic looking physique. It won't be very big. In fact, they'll probably end up looking smaller just because of the fat loss component that goes along with this. If you gain a little tiny bit of muscle and it gives your muscles a slightly better shape, but you lose a decent amount of fat along with it, you're actually going to end up looking smaller, even though you've done hypertrophy training to grow your muscles. So again, we see sometimes like the pro bodybuilder women who do look very, very muscular, which is cool. Like if that's what they want to do, aesthetics are totally a matter of preference. But the average woman who is not taking all of the anabolic steroids and stuff, which are very prevalent in the bodybuilding scene, is just not going to put on a ton of muscle. All they're going to do is shape their muscle into an aesthetic that they probably will like a lot more and get a lot healthier in doing so. So anyway, that's hypertrophy training in a nutshell, or at least the benefits of it.
That weakness you're noticing isn't just about age. It's about giving your body the right protein to maintain your strength and independence. While most protein supplements lead to bloating and digestive issues after 50, grass-fed beef protein is different. Unlike whey and plant-based protein that can cause uncomfortable digestive problems, grass-fed beef protein is a dairy-free source of complete protein, which means it gives you all the building blocks your body needs in a form that it can actually use. Getting more native path complete protein in your diet helps maintain muscle strength without the stomach issues that make other proteins unbearable. So if you're looking for a delicious way to add more high-quality protein to your diet, look no further than Native Path Complete Protein. At only 110 calories per serving, each scoop packs 20 grams of grass-fed beef protein and contains 0 sugar, dairy, soy, and gluten. It's available in chocolate and vanilla and tastes unbelievable in anything you add it to: water, coffee, smoothies, you name it. And the best part, Native Path offers amazing bundle deals. You can get 3 or 6 bags at a fraction of the price of other brands. Plus, they offer a 360-day no-risk, money-back guarantee and an 800 number for any questions about usage, recipes, or ingredients. And you'll speak to a real person that's ready to help. Visit nativepathcompleteprotein.com/co-movement and start your transformation today. Again, that is nativepathcompleteprotein.com/co-movement.
We'll talk about how to go about doing this in a little bit, but first, now that we've done the benefits of hypertrophy training, I want to talk about the benefits of strength training. And hold on just a second. I'm going to get a sip of water here. Okay. So remember, I'm going to keep pointing this out because I want people to understand the difference between hypertrophy and strength. Hypertrophy is all about muscle. We just talked about that. You're just growing your muscles to the size and shape that you like and making them healthier and all the health benefits that come with that. Now we're going to talk about strength training and the benefits of strength training. And remember, strength training is about movement. When we're talking about strength, we're talking about how much force you can produce in a given movement: squat, pull up, push up, whatever. So benefits of strength training. This should be really obvious to everyone. Just think about it. What are the benefits of being strong? To put it most simply, strength is required to do anything physical, right? If you have let's say you have a very weak squat pattern, and notice I didn't say weak legs, weak quads. Remember, we're not talking about muscle here. We're talking about movement. So we're talking about a weak squat. If you have a very weak squat pattern, you might struggle to get out of a chair, right? Without using the armrests and pushing down with your hands. If you make your squat pattern stronger, now you have no problem just getting up from that chair. If you make your squat even stronger still, maybe now you can be standing, go all the way down into a full squat and come all the way back up. If you make your squat pattern even stronger still, you can do that same squat all the way down to the floor and back up while holding a heavy object. Let's say squatting down, picking up your grandchild and standing back up to hold them, right? And you can just keep going with it. You can make your squat even stronger and get to the point where you can squat all the way down and up with one leg. So that's the big benefit of strength training, is it just makes you more able to do physical things, which is really, really important for our quality of life, right? In other words, and I really want to hammer this point, strength is what makes you functional. You know, people talk a lot about functional training. That's become like a buzzword, functional training. It's become a big buzzword in the whole fitness world. I mean, gosh, in the whole last 30 and 40 years, you hear this term all the time. And it's really a frustrating word for a lot of personal trainers or for people who kind of understand this stuff, because it's really misused. And what a lot of people think of as functional training really isn't what I would call functional training. You know, to tell you a little secret here, strength training is functional training. That's what functional training really is, in my opinion. Functional training is strength training. They're the same thing. You know, when you see people doing silly exercises like, standing on one foot on a Bosu ball while curling a little pink dumbbell in your left hand and juggling 2 tennis balls in your right hand, all while blindfolded. And, they do all these silly exercises, or I guess if you want to call it that, that just, and they call it functional training because I don't know, you're doing a whole bunch of weird stuff at the same time. That's kind of what we've seen in the as a trend in the fitness world in the last 20 or 30 years. That's not functional training. That's not making you better at doing anything in the real world. Learning how to squat, learning how to hinge, learning how to press, pull, rotate, brace, and grip objects, all with good form and all with proper mechanics. That's what makes your body more functional. Those are the patterns that you want to get stronger at. If you want a body that can just do things in the real world, a wide variety of things, almost anything that you would want to do. So yeah, again, just because this is really, really important, a functional body is a body that can do physical things well. Strength is required to do physical things well. So strength training is functional training. All right. So that's the main benefit of strength training, of course. Other benefits, it makes you resistant to injury. Again, much like hypertrophy training, we already talked about that. Consider slipping on, an icy surface, or, tripping over a toy that's on your living room floor. And, if you're strong, let's say you're strong enough to do push-ups really well, you might be able to reach your arms out and catch yourself and, hit the ground a little less hard and save yourself from injury, or maybe, when you slip on that icy surface, your one foot shoots out to the side and you try to catch yourself on that foot. If you have a strong squat, if you have a strong lunge, you can catch yourself in that position and not hit the ground. If you're weak in those patterns, you're going to be in for a little more trouble and maybe break something or tear something. So strength training, super, super important to prevent injury. And that's really the two main things when it comes to strength. It's just, I say just as if this is like a minor thing. Strength is important because it helps you do physical things and it prevents you from injury. That's why we want strength. Another sip of water. Okay. And just like with hypertrophy training, we lose strength as we age. Now, we already talked about how quickly we lose muscle when we age, and that's why hypertrophy training is important for everyone. Here's the scary thing. We lose strength even faster as we age. Okay. And we talked about, like, with losing muscle, we lose that pretty quickly. Strength, we lose quite a bit faster. You lose about 2% of your strength per year after the age of 40. So, like, let's run through it again, just like we did with the loss of muscle. That means that, well, first of all, that means we lose strength twice as fast as we lose muscle. But at 2% a year, what can we expect? By the age of 50, we've lost 20% of the strength that we had at the age of 40. That's a lot. And that's only when you're 50 years old. By 60, we've lost 40% of our strength. That's nearly half. By 70, we've lost 60% of our strength. By the age of 80, we've lost 80% of the strength that we had when we were 40 years old. 80%. And so you can only imagine what that does to your quality of life. If quality of life is all about, or at least a big component of it is how much you can physically do, can you go outside and go for a walk? Can you go up and down stairs? Can you do all your activities of daily living? Can you play with your grandkids, pick them up, carry them? Strength is so important for quality of life. If you've lost 80% of your strength that you had at 40 when you're 80 years old, it goes without saying how much that impacts your quality of life. So the good news, though, again, age-related strength loss, just like with age-related muscle loss, is extremely preventable with strength training. So we do hypertrophy training to hold on to our muscle. We do strength training to hold on to our strength as we get older. Will you manage to keep all of your strength? Just like with muscle? No, probably not. Almost certainly not. But you can retain a lot of it, just like with the muscle. That will drastically improve, your quality of life and what you can do when you're in your later years. So bottom line, everyone should be doing strength training, just like everyone should be doing hypertrophy training. In your younger years, you'll do strength training to gain an appreciable amount of strength, to perform better, all of your hobbies, activities, sports, whatever. In your later years, you'll do strength training to hold on to that functionality as much as possible and keep a long healthy quality of life. Okay. So far we've made the case for hypertrophy, which is growing your muscles to a healthy or optimal size, whatever that means for you. And we've made the case for strength, which is being able to exert an appreciable amount of force over different movements, and why that's important also. So hopefully you're sold, and now you see the benefits of both having muscle and being relatively strong. So where do we go from here with the podcast? Probably what most people would want to know is, how do I do this, right? So how do I train for hypertrophy? How do I train to grow my muscles? What exercises should I do? How often should I do them? And what does that training actually look like? And how do I train for strength? Same questions, right? All right. So let's get into it. That's the fun part of this episode. And what we'll do is first I'll talk about training for hypertrophy, what that looks like and how you do it. And then we'll get into training for strength and what that is and how you do that. So another sip of water here. Man, I'm dehydrated this morning. All right. So training for hypertrophy. And I've got a lot of notes here. One thing I want to say as a kind of a disclaimer and to give credit where credit's due, I wouldn't call myself an expert in this kind of stuff. Colloquially, some people might see me as that because I'm a personal trainer and this is my passion. I've been studying it for a long time, and I teach people how to do this. In the world of science, the true experts are like, the PhDs, the exercise scientists, exercise physiologists who study this stuff, do all the research on it, write very impressive books about it, that kind of thing. My job with this podcast is, I learn from all those experts. I read all their books. I listen to their podcasts. I, attend their seminars if I can, that sort of thing. And I know that a lot of our community members don't have time to do that. So I try to get all of this information from these really top level guys and learn it myself because it interests me. Then on this podcast, hopefully I can communicate to you what I've learned through my own experience and from all these true experts in these fields. So before we go on, I just want to say that a lot of the information that I have coming up about how to train for these things comes from a list of people that's too long to name, but I do want to give special credit to someone that I like a lot, an exercise physiologist by the name of Dr. Andy Galpin. Great exercise physiologist, exercise scientist. He studies this stuff. He conducts a ton of research, and he's also a phenomenal educator. He teaches graduate level classes in exercise physiology and that kind of thing. And he puts out a podcast. He's been interviewed on YouTube a lot. So I would recommend that if this stuff really interests any of you guys, and you want to dive deeper into it, my recommendation is to look up the Huberman Lab podcast. That's the podcast done by Dr. Andrew Huberman, because Andrew Huberman had this guy that I'm talking about, Dr. Andy Galpin, on, and they did a 6-part series on fitness. And it's about, I don't know, it's probably about 20 hours of really in-depth, amazing information, which I know a lot of people don't have time to go through, but a good chunk of the information that I'm going to present to you here is stuff that I'm kind of pulling from that episode. So I just want to make sure to give credit where it's due. Okay, let's jump in. Training for hypertrophy. So again, let's be clear about the goal, because that's the first thing. You have to know your goal when you're training. If you don't have a goal that makes sense, then your training isn't going to make sense. So the goal of hypertrophy training, what is it? Hopefully you know, because we've talked about it already. You're trying to increase the size of a particular muscle. That's what hypertrophy training is. Hypertrophy means growth. We're going to use resistance training, weights, body weight exercises, whatever, to try to grow a certain muscle or certain muscles, whichever ones you prefer to grow or make bigger. So remember, hypertrophy training targets a specific muscle. You select a specific muscle on your body that you would like to make bigger, and you train it in a way that tells that muscle to grow. And by the way, just what is muscle growth? What does it mean for a muscle to get bigger? What we're really talking about is protein synthesis, which means making new proteins. Muscle is made out of protein. So if you want to make a muscle bigger, then what you're really trying to do is add more muscle, more protein to that muscle. Okay. And that doesn't mean just simply eating more protein. You have to tell your body to create new muscle proteins. These are built in your body. It's kind of like building a brick wall. Say you have a brick wall that's 5 feet high, but you want it to be 10 feet high. Well, a brick wall is made out of bricks. So how do you make it taller? You add more bricks. Same thing with muscle. Muscle is made out of protein. You want to make the muscle bigger, you have to add more protein. Again, not just eating more protein, you have to tell your body to make new muscle proteins, and that'll make that muscle bigger. So that's what we're trying to do that's the goal of hypertrophy training, to tell your body to make a certain muscle, whichever one you choose, bigger by adding more proteins to it. Okay, so how do you do that? What makes a muscle grow? The most important thing here is that there has to be some sort of signal. Okay. That is, you have to tell your muscle to grow. And there's a few different ways to do this. There's a few different signals that you can send that will tell a muscle to grow. Another sip of water. Okay. One signal is mechanical tension. In other words, making it contract really, really hard against some heavy resistance. When a muscle is called upon to produce a lot of force, you're contracting it really hard, and you repeat this multiple times in a workout, and you repeat that for multiple workouts. This sends a strong signal to the muscle to grow and get bigger. Another way you can send a signal, though, is with metabolic stress. So this means like subjecting the muscle to some fatigue failure, basically. This is a slightly different strategy than the mechanical tension strategy. This involves basically working the muscle to near exhaustion or near the point of failure, which can be accomplished with lighter weights. You don't even really need heavy weight for this. But bear in mind, that doesn't mean that it's easy. It's actually really, really hard, because you're going to you're trying to get as many repetitions as possible, and you're getting to the point where your muscle is screaming for you to stop, and you keep pushing to try to get a few extra reps. So it might be with light weight, but it's not easy. I want to make that clear. And doing this, going to the point of failure or near failure, results in significant metabolic disturbances, I guess you could say, as the muscle reaches the point of failure. And these metabolic disturbances become the signal that tells that muscle to grow. So we got two mechanisms so far: mechanical tension, just contracting the muscle really hard multiple times. That sends a signal. We got this metabolic stress. This sends another signal that can tell the muscle to grow. And then the third thing, I almost didn't put this in here because I don't think it's quite as important, but muscle damage can also send a signal telling the muscle to grow, or muscle breakdown, however you want to think about it. So this one's a little iffy when it comes to the science, and it's definitely not necessary, but it's been long thought, and you've probably heard this, people say this a lot, that when we lift weights or do exercise that's really strenuous, our muscles get little tears in them, little micro trauma, you could call it. And it's thought by some scientists that this little bit of micro damage that the muscle undergoes, it also sends a signal telling that muscle to grow and become bigger. So there we go. These are basically the three things that we want to subject the target muscle to if we want it to get bigger. Mainly the first two: mechanical tension, contracting it really hard against a heavy resistance multiple times repeatedly over many workouts, or the metabolic stress, which is accomplished by going to near failure with that muscle. Either one will do the trick. You can do the first strategy, you can do the second strategy. Most of the time, you're probably going to be doing a combination of both. Okay. So again, though, what's this going to look like in the gym? We can start talking about the protocols here. How are you going to accomplish this in your workout? How do you design a workout for hypertrophy? Another sip of water. Good thing we have an editor. He can edit out all these breaks and sips of water. Okay. So this is the cool thing with hypertrophy training. There are actually many, many different ways to succeed with this. And many different ways to do it, which is nice because it means you have options. This is actually a big difference. I'll flag this right now. This is a big difference between hypertrophy training versus strength training. As we'll see later when we talk about strength training requires a lot more precision, both in program design, but also in how you execute the program and how you actually perform the exercises. Strength training is a little more advanced in that sense, whereas hypertrophy training is as Dr. Galpin puts it, almost idiot proof. Hypertrophy training is actually very, very simple. And again, that doesn't mean that it's easy. It's actually really hard to do. You're going to be doing a lot of hard work, but it's very simple in terms of program design and execution. Okay. So let's get into it. What do we have to do in the gym to grow muscle for hypertrophy training? I'll talk about a few different factors. I got like 5 or 6 factors that you need to, this is like a checklist. These are the things you have to check off in order to make your muscle grow. So the first thing is exercise selection. Which exercises are you going to do? The way you do this is first you choose which muscle it is that you want to grow. Maybe you want bigger quads, maybe you want bigger glutes, maybe you want bigger biceps or a bigger chest, whatever. You choose the muscle that you want to grow. And then you have to choose an exercise that actually works that muscle. This can be a little trickier than you might think. So, for example, if you want the biceps, you do a bicep curl. If you want the chest, maybe you do a bench press or, whatever. But the important point here, and the reason I say that it's a little trickier than you might think is you have to make sure that you're actually using and stressing the muscle that you're targeting, because not every exercise works the same for every person. And this is why you'll hear, for example, that one guy does bench presses and he's like, oh, that was awesome. That made I did a bench press program for weeks and it made my chest bigger. And then another guy tries to do a bench press program and it does absolutely nothing to grow his chest. Why is that the case? How does that happen? Because we all have slightly different mechanics in how we perform exercises. We all have a slightly different technique, maybe. It could be that one person, the first person, when they do a bench press, they're really using their pectoralis, their chest muscles to perform that exercise. The second person might be relying more on their triceps and anterior deltoids. And this is why, that first person might do bench presses and then the next day be like, oh man, my chest is so sore. And the second person might do bench presses and the next day be like, I don't feel anything in my chest, but my triceps are tender to the touch today. So when you're selecting your exercise to grow a certain muscle, you have to make sure that you're actually using that muscle that you're trying to grow. And if you're not, then that's just not a good exercise for you. If you try a bench press and you don't feel it in your chest and your pec muscles are not sore the next day, maybe for you a dumbbell bench press is a better exercise. Or maybe for you an incline press or cable flies or something like that, or push-ups. There's a ton of different exercises that you can choose that should work a certain muscle, and you need to find the exercise that you feel that where you feel that actual muscle that you're targeting doing the work. And a good way to tell if it's actually the right exercise for you is, do you feel a little sore in that muscle the next day? Or when you're doing your workout, does that particular muscle that you're targeting actually get pumped? Does it actually fill up with blood? We all kind of know what it's like when you get a little bit of a muscle pump after you do several sets of an exercise. Those are kind of the things you're looking for to make sure that you've chosen the right exercise for you to grow the muscle that you're trying to grow. So exercise selection, that's the big thing right off the bat. The second thing you want to check off is rep ranges. So how many reps are you going to do? Are you going to do sets of 5 reps, sets of 2 reps, sets of 15 reps? What are we going to do here? When it comes to hypertrophy, there's actually a really wide range of reps that will work. Basically, you can do pretty much anywhere from 5 reps, that'd be kind of the minimum. I'd say 5 or 6 reps, all the way up to even as much as 30 reps per set. And anywhere in between. So you could do sets of 5, you could do sets of 8, sets of 12, 15, 20, all the way up to 30 and still see muscle growth. The rep range isn't actually that important, which is why I said that hypertrophy training is almost kind of idiot proof. What is important is that you're taking the set to near failure. We talked about that before and how important that is to get hypertrophy. Basically, when you're working out and doing your exercise, you want to get to the point where you probably couldn't do another rep, or maybe you could squeeze out 1 or 2 more at most, but that's about it. If you get to the end of if you're trying to grow, I'll just use the chest again as an example. If you're trying to grow your chest and you're using, let's say, dumbbell bench press to do that, if at the end of your set, you're like, oh yeah, I could, I did a set of 10, I could have probably made it to 15. You didn't go far enough, and you're probably not going to see any muscle growth from that. You want to make sure that you go to the point where you either can't do anymore, or you could only do maybe 1 or 2 more. 1 or 2 reps in reserve, we call that. And that's a good rule of thumb for hypertrophy training. So the rep range, very wide, 5 to 30 reps per set. The important thing just being that you go to near failure, 1 or 2 reps in reserve at the end. The next thing we need to check off is intensity. Intensity refers to like how heavy of a weight you're choosing, like how hard are you pushing, or how hard do you have to push to lift this weight, right? The cool thing with hypertrophy training is the intensity doesn't actually have to be that high. Like notice we just talked about rep ranges. I said you could do 8 reps per set, 12 reps per set, 20 reps, even up to 30 reps per set. That's a lot of repetitions in a single set of an exercise. And that all works for hypertrophy training. But if you're doing, let's say, 20 reps per set, you're not going to be using a very heavy weight. If the weight was really, really heavy for you, you're not going to get to 20 reps or 30 reps, right? Again, the important thing just being that you're going to near failure. If you're doing sets of 5 to 8, then it'll be a heavier weight. If you're doing sets of 12 or 15, it'll be a lighter weight. If you're doing sets of 30, it'll be a much lighter weight. And all these will work for hypertrophy training as long as you're going pretty close to failure at the end. Next thing, I'll just say, if you want to think of it in terms of your 1 rep max when it comes to intensity, you could be working out at 40 or 50% of your 1 rep max and still see amazing muscle growth. It doesn't have to be, if you have a 1 rep max of, 200 pounds in the bench press, you don't need to be benching 185 in order to see muscle growth. You could be bench pressing 115, 100 pounds and still see great muscle growth. Just make sure you take that set to near failure. And then the last couple things we got to check off are volume and frequency. So volume is, how much of this exercise are you doing in a given week? Volume, if we're talking about hypertrophy training, volume is really, really important. Volume is the primary driver of muscle growth. It's hard to get a muscle to grow if you only work it a little bit each week. What the research shows is that and this is a general rule of thumb, none of these things are set in stone, but about 15 to 20 sets per week is ideal for hypertrophy. So, for example, you want to grow your, let's say, quads, your quadricep muscles. If you work out 3 days a week, aim for about 5 or 6 sets targeting your quads in each of those workouts. So, you work out Monday, Wednesday, Friday. You do 5 sets for your quads on Monday, 5 sets for your quads on Wednesday, 5 sets on Friday. That's 15 sets for the week. We're aiming for 15 to 20 sets per week to the target muscle. That's ideal for muscle growth. You can get some muscle growth with less than that. A lot of people are not going to the gym 3 days a week, or they're splitting up their workouts differently and they don't want to hit the same muscle all the time. But if we're looking for the optimal protocol to grow a certain muscle, if that's really important to you, hitting that muscle for 15 to 20 sets per week is the optimal volume. And that's really important for maximizing muscle growth, if that's your goal. And then frequency, 2 to 4 times per week. And that's what we're shooting for. You can work out twice a week. Again, working out this specific muscle that you're trying to grow. You could do it twice a week. You could do it 3 times, 4 times a week. 2 to 4 times per week seems to be what the research shows to be optimal for most people. So that's it. So to recap, you want to grow a certain muscle. You want a certain muscle to hypertrophy. So you're doing hypertrophy training. Choose exercises that work that muscle, where you actually feel that target muscle being stressed by the exercise. Do 15 to 20 total sets per week for that muscle. Remember, that's really important. Volume is the primary driver of hypertrophy. And then spread that work over 2 to 4 days for the week. Okay. And that's hypertrophy training in a nutshell. And then that brings us on to training for strength, the second part. So we just talked about how to train for hypertrophy, how to train to make your muscles grow, whatever muscle that is, and however much you want it to grow. Now we're going to talk about how to train for the other goal you might have here, which is strength. Let me just take a sip. And just like with hypertrophy training, we're going to start off with the most important thing, the goal. Okay. So let's be really clear about the goal of strength training. Now we're not talking about muscle. We're not talking about a specific muscle. We're talking about movement. With strength training, you're trying to increase the amount of force that you are able to apply in a given movement. Whatever that movement is, you select a movement that's important to you that you want to get stronger at, and you're trying to increase the amount of force that you can apply in that movement. That's what strength training is. That's the goal of strength training. So with strength, there's two components to strength. Strength is a little more complicated maybe than hypertrophy training, but still not too bad. You can wrap your mind around this pretty easy. There's two components to strength, I would say. Is just the physiology, the ability of your actual muscle tissue to contract hard, okay, and produce a lot of force. This comes down to factors like how many motor units or muscle fibers you're able to recruit when you're performing the movement. Generally speaking, the more motor units you can recruit, the more force you will be able to apply in that movement. Therefore, the stronger you are in that movement. So that's the first component of strength. The second component is skill or technique. A lot of people don't realize that strength really is a skill. So expressing strength in any given movement that you care about is a skill. Every movement that you could select has kind of an ideal form or technique which will allow you to produce the most force in that movement. So one person might have, let's say, bigger muscles and even more motor units that they can recruit, let's say in their leg muscles. That person might have bigger leg muscles, be able to recruit more muscle fibers, and then the second person, smaller leg muscles, right? But that second person might actually have a stronger squat. And why is that? It's because strength is a skill, and it really does come down to having the right technique that allows you to express the most strength possible. So if the first person has big strong legs, but they have poor technique in their squat, and the second person has smaller legs, less muscle, but they have really excellent technique in their squat, that second person might actually be able to squat more weight than the first person. It doesn't just come down to how much muscle you have. It comes down to your skill at the movement itself and your ability to optimize your form and technique to express as much strength as possible. And that's why strength training is, I like to think of it as practice just as much as anything else, because you're practicing the skill of whatever it is, squatting, deadlifting, overhead pressing, whatever. So these are the things that we're working on if we want to get stronger in a given movement. We're trying to produce the most force we can in the movement we've selected by recruiting as many muscle fibers as possible. And we're trying to do so with the best or most optimal technique or form for that movement. So learning how to produce a large amount of force and then practicing better and better technique. That's the goal of strength training. So what are the protocols? How do we do this? What does this look like in the gym? Again, we'll go through the checklist. So with strength training, we'll start with exercise choice. That's simple. You're going to choose the movement that you want to be stronger at. If you want to be stronger at a squat, you're going to be squatting. If you want to be stronger at lunging, you're going to be lunging. If you want to be stronger at doing an overhead press, you're going to be doing overhead pressing. You choose the movement that you want to be stronger at, and that's the exercise that you're going to be doing. So exercise selection, that part's easy. Check. The next part, the next thing you need to check off, and we didn't talk about this with hypertrophy training because it wasn't very important, but this is super critical when it comes to strength training. It's probably the most important thing. Hold on a second. And that thing is intent. Okay. And this is where most people screw up strength training, and this is where most people don't get stronger. Intent and intention is the most important thing with strength training. What does that mean? What is intent? You really want to work as hard as possible. You want to push as hard as you possibly can, or pull, or whatever the movement is. Intensity and intent are what drive strength gains. Remember, with hypertrophy, it was volume. With strength, it's your intensity and your intent when you do the movement that drives strength gains the most. Remember, strength is defined as the most force you are able to produce in a given movement. If you want to get stronger at a movement, you have to express as much strength as possible when training it, which means performing the movement as hard as you can with as much force as possible on each rep. Okay. So this is just to kind of like clarify and recap the contrasting point here. With hypertrophy training, we didn't need heavy weights. right? We're just concerned with getting close to failure and disturbing that muscle enough that we sent a signal for it to grow. And that can be accomplished with large rep ranges and relatively light weight, and you can make the muscle grow. With strength training, it requires much higher intensity, which is accomplished by using much heavier weights and lifting it with as much force as you're able to produce. Generally speaking, if you're doing strength training, you're going to be working at least 70 with a weight that is at least 70% of your one rep max, sometimes up to 100%, much heavier weights than you would use in hypertrophy training. Okay, so exercise choice, we got intent, we understand now. That brings us down to rep ranges. Hypertrophy training, growing muscle, I said that was idiot proof. You can do anywhere from 5 to 30 reps per set. Strength training is different because the intensity is so high with strength training. You're going to be doing, and the weight you're choosing is much heavier. You're going to be doing much smaller rep ranges. So generally 3 to 5 reps per set is what's considered kind of ideal for most people for strength training. So if you're trying to get a stronger squat, you'll be doing, I don't know, maybe 3 sets of 5 or 4 sets of 5 or 5 sets of 3, something like that. But you're looking at like sets of 3, 4, 5 reps, sometimes even as low as 1 or 2 reps on occasion. But we're not doing 20 and 30 rep sets here like we might do in hypertrophy training. And then I guess that just brings us down to volume. I said with building muscle, hypertrophy training, volume was the most important driver. It's not that important with strength training. When it comes to strength training, it's just all about intensity more than anything. The volume doesn't have to be very high for strength training. 3 to 5 sets for your given movement, whichever movement you're trying to get stronger at. 3 to 5 sets per workout seems to work really well for most people. And you can do this 2 or 3 times per week. So that's the volume for strength training. And then one more checkpoint for strength training that I didn't put in, I should have mentioned this, I guess, with hypertrophy training, is rest periods. With hypertrophy training, you don't need long rest periods. When you're trying to grow muscle, you don't need long rest periods. You can do a set of dumbbell bench press, rest for a minute or two, and then jump right back on to do your next set, rest for a minute or two, jump right back on to do your next set. Obviously, you won't be able to get as many reps with each set because you're going to be tired, because a minute or two rest is not much, but that's okay. With hypertrophy training, you're just trying to get to the point of near failure, wherever and whenever that comes. And like I said, with hypertrophy training, that metabolic stress is a good thing. It sends a strong signal to your muscle telling it to grow. And you put your muscles under more metabolic stress with shorter rest periods. So hypertrophy training doesn't require long rest periods. Strength training is different. When it comes to strength training, we're trying to produce as much force as possible with each movement and with each set that we do in every single rep. And we do not want to be limited by fatigue. Okay. So if you're trying, let's say you decide that your squat is what you want to get stronger at. You might do a heavy set of squats. It should be heavy if it's strength training and you're pushing as hard as you can with the intent to move the bar with as much strength and force as possible. That's strength training, right? You might do a set of 5 repetitions of squat. And then for your rest period, you might take, I would say, 5, 6 minutes before you come back and you do your next set. Some people take up to 10 minutes or more even with strength training. Again, each set you're going for quality and as much force as you can produce. And you want to make sure that you're as fresh and ready to go as possible at the start of each set if strength is your goal. You don't want to be limited by fatigue. You don't want to be putting your muscles under some metabolic stress, or, you don't want your heart rate to still be super elevated. Like, you definitely should not still be breathing heavy when you come back to do your next set. So strength training is much longer rest periods than hypertrophy training. And that's another thing that a lot of people mess up. Some people are trying to just get out of the gym as quickly as they can. And if you're not allowing yourself to recover as well as possible between each set with strength training, then you're just not going to get stronger. Like, you have to be fresh and ready to go so you can produce all the force you need to tell your muscles to get stronger, or to become stronger at the movement, I should say. Okay, so that's rest periods, and that's everything. So we covered hypertrophy training, all of the benefits of it and why you'd want to do it, why you want to grow muscle. We gave you the protocols, how many, reps, what you should focus on, how you should choose your exercises, how many days per week. And we did the same thing for strength training. I'll wrap this up right now because that's pretty much everything I wanted to cover. But I'll also say that there's significant overlap between these things. It is possible to train just for strength and get stronger at various movements without making your muscles bigger. You can get stronger without getting bigger muscles. And on the flip side, you can do the other thing too. You can get bigger muscles and not get stronger, which surprises a lot of people. You can do pure hypertrophy training, send that signal telling your muscles to grow, but maybe you're using lighter weights, doing longer sets, very short rest periods, because it's hypertrophy training, and you're not moving the weight with as much force as possible. So you're not really gaining strength through this program, even though you are making your muscles bigger. So it is possible to get strength without size, and it's possible to get size without strength. But there's usually significant overlap. Most people, if they make their muscles bigger, they are going to get a little bit stronger. They're going to have more muscle fibers, more motor units to recruit. And most people, if they do strength training, they're going to disturb their muscle enough that it does send a signal telling it to grow. And which is good because most people kind of want both things. You know, as a personal trainer, a lot of the clients I work with, when I ask them what their goals are, they're like, oh, I'd like to, you know, get a little more muscle, be a little more strong, you know, that. So they're kind of, they want it both, strength and hypertrophy. And we talked about the benefits. There's benefits to both. We should all want both. So that's the good news is I would mix it up, honestly. You know, whatever your goal is, train for that. But if you're training for overall health, do a combination of strength training and hypertrophy training and, you know, blend these two things as you see fit. Maybe you do a couple months of strength training and then flip to a couple months of hypertrophy training or, you know, or something like that. But the, you know, the goal is yours to choose. And hopefully what we've covered in this episode gives you a little clarity on the difference between what strength and hypertrophy are, and then how you could target one more so than the other if that matters to you. All right, that's the episode. Thanks for watching, and we will see you in the next one.
If you enjoyed this episode, please consider supporting our sponsors, Native Path Supplements and Lombardi Chiropractic. Your support helps us to bring you 2 new episodes each month. See the show notes for more details and a nice discount from our sponsors. Thank you, and see you next time on the Co-Movement Gym Podcast.